Picasso, who was a Spaniard and was already living outside Spain because he was an anti-fascist, and in fact was asked, but fortunately for you, you probably haven't experienced it, although you have television shots now, like on the weekend. Look at the eyes, absolutely exposed. The lids have been torn away. So this, with the previous thing I showed you of Romney. It isn't a metaphor at all. It stands for nothing. And so one might be looking at this in Picasso, reconstructing this human being, and human being it is. He's torn away the lids and put back together, but when it went back the other way. The nostril was absolutely exposed, like a snorting horse, a prancing, snorting horse in agony and fear. The lips turned inside out, so to speak. And yet a human being. And the interesting thing I find about this particular image here is the hopeful element in it. I suppose it's weighed up by those symbolic tears. Little teardrops. As if it's the teardrops of every thinking and caring man and woman. Almost acid-like, that burns into the flesh. It's almost possibly saying that it's only the teardrops of humanity that can really destroy flesh, and not the fascist, as he thought, because he was a communist all his life, not the fascist bombs. You know, very reminiscent of the spirit of liberty as expressed in possibly Copernicus or Galileo, was it? Who, when the church was persecuting him in the dock, he said, you can persecute me, you can even kill me, but still the world goes round. In that sense, this piece of work, which could very easily have sort of gone over the brink into horror, and therefore possibly pornographic, has, because of odd things like the teardrops, given it a sense of hope and not despair. And it seems to me that not only is this one of the most, this drawing alone I would have thought is one of the most significant statements made about the human condition in the 20th century. At least I think that's how it be recognized in 100 years' time. It also comes to this other point that I seem to feel strongly about as far as art is concerned, and that is, art is reaffirmation. It's a reaffirmation of the significance of man. Don't let us forget that. All right, I've said a lot about that, and I've only said it in relation to this piece of thing, with its sentimentality, its superficiality. What I'm trying to get over to you sixth formers is that this is not real. And that is for all its distortions. In other words, reality has not necessarily got anything to do with its appearance. And most people fall in to that trap. I might be speaking, of course, here to the converted, or preaching to the converted, but I feel it's important for me to get over this point, that you must not confuse reality with its appearance. That this is unnaturalistic. It is not abstract, by the way, not in the general sense of the word. It is a realistic statement. And reality has funny looks to it. Most people hide their faces. They don't want to see reality. That's why they'd cover their walls with stuff like that, to pretend, in fact, that everything is wonderful in the garden. Some people, of course, would say, when they look at that, you know, this fellow Picasso, he can't draw. We all know now, just even some of the comments I've made about what a superb piece of drawing that is. Let's look at this piece of work here. A painting. Anybody know who painted it? You've seen it before. Picasso. Peter, do you know how old he was when he painted it? What? Can't hear. About your age. Yeah. About 16, 17. If he painted like that all his life, he wouldn't have been the significant artist, of course. He's painted in typical tradition of Spanish academic painting of his age, but you must admit, of course, it shows superb control. If some of you think you're so clever, it might be a good idea to look at that. You rarely find precociousness in the visual arts. You know, you get Mozart producing symphonies at a very young age. But that is an extraordinary piece of work and worth reminding us that Picasso, from a very early age, learnt. He's very lucky to have a dedicated father who was an art master. All right. Let's move from that to other odd slides that I want to get through. Just odd ones, they might not even be in order. Here we have El Greco. Romantic in our category. We'll go into him in detail when we study him. Everything is elongated. But what I show you that is to remind you about the point I made about geographical influences, because I've got a detail here. It might not be of that one, right? It isn't of that one. But this is the detail of El Greco. I know it's in black and white. It's very interesting to see. In fact, you look at that, obviously you see a landscape. Landscape is details of a fold, like it's not taken from this painting, but it's a bit of this mantling here. See in that small detail. Sorry. Let's see it the other way round. Yes, that's better. The sort of typical sort of contrasty landscape that you would associate Spain. These are now all out of order. I'm not going to attempt to put them in. Let's just play it by ear as they come through. Oh, sure test of intelligence getting that right. Oh. I think what I've got here is just a pile of slides showing you different schools, just to put you slightly in the picture. This is what they call a surrealistic painting, surrealism, which really stands for superrealism, and is based upon originally Freudian ideas that the unconscious mind is filled with significant symbols, beg your pardon, or symbolism, and these are often reflected in our dream world. And so you've got a school of painting at the beginning of the century who start producing symbolic images unrelated to normal associations. Filled, of course, as you can see here, with various sexual overtones. You often get in surrealistic pictures a very penetrating perspective with far distant sort of landscape, almost as if your boat one day will come home and somewhere out there, peace, you come a bit nearer to reality, and you have I'm not going to go too much into it, but just to put you in the picture of the sorts of work. I mean, you often get semi-clothed women with men with bowler hats related one to t'other in surrealistic imagery, but obviously very sexual in its meaning. We won't attempt to investigate its meaning at the moment. Quite contrasting to that sort of picture is that picture by Rousseau called naive painting or primitive painting, usually associated with people who are self-taught. There was a marvellous, Jackie reminded me, there was a marvellous film yesterday on a naive painter on television. How many apart from Jackie saw it? Right, absolutely fabulous in her honesty, but that's the sort of painting we call naive. It's not the type of work that you get from the sophisticated learning that takes place in art schools. It's direct, it's primitive, it's simple, and has a certain poetry. I don't know what's coming up next. These are out of order, but still, just... Here is a typical, it's the wrong way round, surrealistic picture by one of the greatest artists still living, called Marc Chagall, C-H-A-G-A-L. Here you can see surrealism possibly at its best, where you've got images which have symbolic content. For example, the fish, one associates the fish very much with phallic imagery. One associates the fish, particularly a winged fish, with fertility, in other words, with birth. Here you get the fish flying in the sky. I mean, how could fish fly in the sky? Right? Particularly in relation to a pendulum clock, and the fish playing a fiddle. And then always lovely little images of love around the place. It's a marvellous paint, but I don't want to go into it now. Just give you a taste of them. Another one of Chagall. Oh golly, it's my day today. The thing about surrealism is the recognition that there is something significant about the dream world, because in the dream world you get disassociated figures. The tendency in normal day-to-day living is that we think rather superficially by associations. We think in categories. The psychologist examining somebody, one of the first things he might well do when he's trying to dig deeper into the personality is to see how his mind associates. And so therefore he will say, tell me the first thing that comes into my mind when I say knife. The patient answers fork. Egg, chips. Moon, sun, I don't know. And what happens, of course, in the dream world is that association is broken down. And surrealism attempts to paint these broken down images to find more significant truths underlying it. Of course, that is the wedding feast or something like that. It's obviously about wedding. It's a fabulous picture. You've got the bride and bridegroom there. You've got the nuptial bed. And you've got all sorts of course, he was a Jewish painter, and he believed in he was a member of a certain sect that believed that music was very close to God. And it was through music, and of course through art. And so you've always got, well, Fiddler on the Roof, that's where the title really comes from. Imagery. I don't know if this is the right pile of slides I should be showing you, actually. I don't think they are. Never mind. We'll make use of them. Next person we're going to talk about is Botticelli. Sandro Botticelli. Please write it down. We are now moving sixth formers into the 16th century. I haven't got my exact dates at the moment of Botticelli, but certainly he's living at the middle of the end of the 15th century, and he moves into the 16th century. Yes? Till when? That's right, 1510 to the 16th century, right? He moves over into 1510. Thank you, Lucy. Now, we've already dealt briefly, perhaps, with Piero della Francesca, and I have mentioned to you that Piero della Francesca is essentially a Renaissance artist. In fact, if there's ever an example of what I've been trying to get over of Renaissance art and Renaissance concepts, of this sort of discovery of the dignity of man, this realization that man essentially is the master of his destiny, because that's what it's all about really, as against a medieval concept, then Piero della Francesca is in fact the artist par excellence that weighs up that. All right? He was a typical Renaissance man in as much as he was an erudite learner, an erudite scholar, I suppose, right? And probably one of the most learned men in Italy at the time. All right, let's have a look. Can we have the light off, please? Well, that always takes my breath away. Once more, when we look at this fantastic creature, actually something rather nice was said to me a few years ago. I think it was one of the Parsons family, when I put that up, and I raved about this beauty, and I was going on almost to say that God doesn't make creatures like her anymore. And Belinda Parsons turned round and said, "I know why you like that creature, and you have been speaking with such superlatives. It's just like your wife." So I went back and had a look at my wife. I must tell her that sometime. But can we make her laugh? She's so beautiful, we ought to make her larger. Really, I think art is a marvellous thing if it can produce images like that. Never let us forget sixth form, that art is just a dollop of dirt, really, mixed together with a bit of oil, or in this case albumen or egg, tempera, because it's a tempera painting, and just slapped on a bit of another bit of earth, canvas. It's sheer magic. We all take these things for granted, you know, these fantastic paintings. That's all it is. And artists create these wonderful creatures. Now, all right, you can be forgiven once more, sixth formers, if you look at that painting and you get the feeling, especially now that you've seen Masaccio with his angular, heroic austerity, and you looked at Piero della Francesca with his distilled, almost precise, mathematical, simple forms, which gives that feeling of eternal air and a frozen calmness. If you look at this and say, this fellow Sumray is confusing us, because we have certain things in that painting that seem to be going backwards. What is it I'm talking about in this painting? Detail. In fact, we're going to see a man who paints pictures which is filled with studied detail. I mean, not only the detail of the delicate locks of her hair, but all the flowers that are dotted about, and so on. And you can be forgiven, say, if you feel that this is more what one would associate with what was going on in France with what you call Gothic or International Gothic. I think part of the confusion, and it's my fault, part of the confusion might well be, sixth formers, that because I don't go into Gothic art too thoroughly, that you're not aware of the interplay between paintings in Europe particularly lowlands, which you will do with Mr. Higgins, and painting in Italy. In the Gothic period of painting, there was equally a return to nature as we find in the beginning of the Renaissance. It wasn't the Francescan influence, but there was a return to nature. There was a return to look at things as they actually were, but it went in a slightly different way and didn't sort of end up in the same sort of journey that Renaissance art went. But there is this interpenetration, and painters in Italy, particularly at this period, are coming into contact with Gothic art, and so there's an influence. And Botticelli is partially influenced by Gothic art with its preoccupation of these studied details. But nevertheless, as we shall see, he is very much a Renaissance artist. Well, I hate to leave this delightful creature, but let's push on a little bit so we can get a general picture of the man. Botticelli, incidentally, as I hinted before, means round barrel. Most of the artists of this period tended to have nicknames. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Tintoretto, great Venetian painter, literally means tinter or dyer. Now, it's difficult to know whether, in fact, when we come to see his paintings, it's difficult to know whether he was nicknamed dyer, because he tended, or at least on first impression when you look at his paintings, he tended to build up his pictures in thin glazes of colour, which they could do because there was the invention of oil paint, or whether, in fact, his father was a dyer, a craftsman and a dyer, and he was the son of the dyer, and therefore he's called Tintoretto, little tinter. Right? Just as much as Botticelli is little round barrel. Not little teeny weeny round barrel. He might have been a little round fellow when he was a little kid running about his village. And so the neighbours in Italian diminutives expressed a little round barrel. Or it might well have been that his father was a cooper, a barrel maker. And outside his shop was a barrel. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. On the other hand, it might well be that it's something like Tintoretto related to his paintings, because the interesting thing when we look at Botticelli's paintings, that most of his figures tend to be terribly thin and elongated and ethereal, and they swoon in front of us. That makes me feel that perhaps he himself was short and round, because there's a famous euphemism, as I've mentioned before. In every fat man, there's a thin one trying to get out. In every fat girl, there's a dream of a Marilyn Monroe. In every thin one, there's a dream maybe of Mae West. I don't know if you know who Mae West was. But it's very interesting. You should be very careful when you look at styles in painting. Often the paintings reflect the very opposite of what you would relate to the external personality of the particular individual that painted it. I know one particular girl who's terribly shy, but her paintings aren't. And you would think, well, if art expresses the individuality of a person, why isn't her painting shy? Because her shyness is only her painting is a private thing. If you're shy, there can be all sorts of reasons why one is shy, or reticent. It's a protection, more often than not. We all have to build up our defences round us to survive, so that we're not sort of raped too often, either intellectually or physically. And so we build up various walls, if you like. This is what we've been into this before. It's what the adolescence is about. And we build up these walls to protect our integrity, which is a very valuable thing. It is the most valuable thing that we all have. Our own individuality, our own uniqueness. There's nobody quite like us. And it's not conceit, that's reality. Robert Hoskins is Robert Hoskins, and he's got to live with Robert Hoskins for the rest of his bloody life. He's got to walk about with that carcass, whether it's short, whether it's tall, whether it's fat, And he's got to learn to live with it. And if he doesn't learn to live with it, forgive me, Robert, I'm talking about you, but I'm talking about all of us. All right? You've got to learn to live with that. We put up various defences to protect those things subconsciously we consider as being vital to us. So it's no coincidence that it's possible that somebody has built up how could I put it? You know, we'll say shyness or reticence, right, in order to protect something, but when they are doing something where it's in relation to them and them alone, or them and their God, right, they are much more freer, and the most reticent person can do the most lively, vital, dynamic paintings. And equally you get so-called extroverted people, right, who appear to be dynamic, right, in their day-to-day relationship with people, and you look at their paintings and they're terribly shy and reticent and refined, over-refined, right? So it might well be that the thin people of Botticelli is a reflection of, in every fat man there's a thin one trying to get out. Don't let's take that too far, but all right. Botticelli, incidentally, a very Christian man indeed, very religious, to such an extent that it affected his painting later on in his life, as we shall see. But he was always also a scholar of a man, closely associated with the Medicis that I've mentioned, the Medici family, Lorenzetti Medici, who held court and was a patron to the artists, and therefore closely linked with the Neoplatonic Academy, which you remember is an attempt to reconcile these new discoveries of knowledge, pagan ideas, with Christian ideas. And I think we will find, when we look at Botticelli's work, that although on the surface it might appear different to the tradition of Masaccio and Piero della Francesca, we will find, in fact, that he, like Piero della Francesca, in a different way, with more experience, because he's post-Piero della Francesca, expresses, in fact, the Neoplatonic concept of reconciling Christian with pagan ideas. These are small details, just to give you a taste of him. We'll come back to them. Although we'll come back to this in a little bit more detail, I want you to particularly observe the elongation or distortion, and we've got to talk about distortion when we're going to talk about Botticelli, because distortion, we've talked about it when we gave an introduction on Picasso, when we're looking at Guernica. But here we have distortion, which is hardly the quality that you would associate with Masaccio and Piero della Francesca, particularly Piero della Francesca, because if you can recall, the Piero della Francesca's paintings is based upon Greek canons of beauty, perfect harmony, perfect balance. Everything has been worked out that there is a right relationship between things. And yet here we have a Renaissance artist where we find distortion taking place, which seems to contradict this question of perfect proportion. But do notice that sort of swan-like, almost oversimplified, cylindrical form, which is a neck. But isn't she beautiful? All right, we come to the first painting. I haven't got many paintings of Botticelli to show you. I don't feel free with this bloody thing hanging around my neck. I think any minute it's probably off anyway. No. Maybe if I put that in there it would help. Yes, that's a bit better. We'll light a cigarette. Botticelli. Can we bring that a bit closer, I think? Does it get smaller? I can't remember. Right, that's better. Has in some ways a sense of tranquility like we saw in Pier de Francesca. It has something else which we've got to sort of discover. The Birth of Venus, done in the middle period of Botticelli's life. And I make that, I mention that specifically because when we look at later paintings, we find a very interesting change that takes place in his life and subsequent in his work. I must say that for many years I talked about this picture and I never saw the original, which is really awful, terrible admission. And I must say that for many years I didn't like Botticelli. I'm giving you my personal things. Now, I didn't like him. I'd much rather have the Masaccio or the Pier della Francesca and the apparently classical intellectual simplicity. Until I was lucky enough to find myself, again, fortunately with my wife, face to face with this painting in Florence. Now, paintings rarely root me to the spot. I find, I don't know if you find, sixth formers, that there's a qualitative difference between listening or appreciating a piece of music, a form of art, and looking at a painting. It certainly seems to me that when I listen to music, like Beethoven's Violin Concerto, that I am absolutely rooted, and it transforms me immediately, there and then. It takes me into a different world. And it doesn't matter what goes on, the world of whatever Beethoven is trying to create, it takes over. But I don't find that with painting. Because I can walk past a painting and it doesn't have an effect on me. And I discovered, for me, that painting, the appreciation of painting, was a much more, a less immediate thing. Partly because it doesn't exist in time, and so therefore you've got to create the time for it. You've got to, it seems to me, make more effort to appreciate painting than appreciating music. Because music hammers, I suppose, at the senses, the auditory sense. You know, it's difficult not to hear it. Whereas painting, I mean, you can't really listen to a piece of music and not hear a bit of it. Is that so? Are you with me on this? Whereas painting, you can look at it and not see it, as most people do. They might imbibe it. I mean, all people do imbibe art. They may not know anything about art, but they are what they are because of the art that's done. And if you say, and they're quite, oh, well, I don't know anything about this art. I'm not interested. I never go to galleries, you know. But it's there all the time, in all the visual imagery of which man is made for man, around them. And people might not have looked at this Birth of Venus, but they all know it, strangely enough. Most people know this painting, not by name, wouldn't be able to draw it for you, they wouldn't know the name of the artist, but it's been around for a few hundred years, and odd reproductions have been reproduced, even skits have been produced on it, so it's sort of imbibed in the process of living. In fact, I remember a horrific story about this particular painting. But first of all, before I go on to that, let me go back. But I was fortunate enough to walk into the Uffizi in Florence. That was before the floods. And this massive hall, outside was in the courtyard was that marvellous statue of Michelangelo of David. I walked into this hall, and in one corner there was only two paintings in this massive, beautiful, classical Renaissance building. In one corner, not against the wall, but on an easel, was the Botticelli Birth of Venus, and the other corner was a crucifixion by Cimabue, the master of Giotto, right, and which is unfortunately no longer in existence, because it was destroyed by the flood. And I absolutely was rooted to the spot. And I suddenly discovered Botticelli. And very few paintings, in my experience, has done that to me. Even Rembrandt. To the horrific side of the story, there used to be a reproduction in the library at Ware Grammar School, where I taught part-time for 6 years before I came here, of this painting. And there was a particular member of the staff, I mustn't be too precise, but a very important member of the staff, right? He used to complain constantly, a senior member of the staff, that used to complain constantly to the headmistress, sometimes when she deigned to speak to me because I was a man and don't think she spoke to men. And now you know the reason what's behind the story. Right? Used to complain about this reproduction that was in the library. And it's quite vulgar. Vulgar. Quite vulgar. And ugly. He did once say to me, well, after all, Mr. Sumray, that would tell you a relationship, you never call me Harman. Women's bodies are not beautiful, are they? And she really thought this was ugly and that it was pornographic. I don't know, maybe she's got an imagination. Perhaps the girl's hand or the goddess's hand is in a rather awkward place, but at least Botticelli's had the perhaps good taste to put a bit of drapery between her body and her hand. But she found it pornographic. In other words, a Mrs. Whitehouse in miniature, I suppose. So two viewpoints. One of a person looking at painting and being rooted to the spot, and another one thinking that it's quite pornographic and ugly, and one should not let it be seen by very good little grammar school girls, as they try to make it Ware Grammar School. I suppose they still do. My silence is deliberate, so you can look at it. Of course, what could first come to our mind, reminiscent, I suppose, of Uccello, is the non-religious, or the apparently non-religious subject. In fact, not only is non-religious, but distinct to Uccello, it's not secular. It is mythological. The Birth of Venus, the title itself. On the other hand, you could look at this rather beautiful ethereal creature that seems to be dissolving away. And you can think it's very much equal, it's very much like a Madonna. And I think what you will find in these mythological subjects of Botticelli is this attempt to reconcile the teachings of Plato and the teachings of the church. And he marries them. And so you get pictures which in one way are on one level are mythological, and on the other level are terribly Christian. But what have we got here? We've got the Birth of Venus. Here we have this ethereal, elongated, gentle, refined image of quite virginous, I suppose, in a way, unravished perhaps. Remember the unravished bride of silence? Right? Being wafted, so to speak, mythologically, wafted into existence on this massive shell, and on her left is, I suppose, Flora, goddess of flowers. I'm not absolutely certain, but being studied with that lovely sort of decoration reminiscent of Gothic, or reminiscent of Sienese, studied with that sort of decorative thing, sort of working her, so to speak, into earthly existence. And you've got the two winds there, I don't know their technical names, gently sort of blowing her, and the lovely sort of rhythm that's running through the whole thing. And you get this feeling of this creature you can look at it in two ways, the interpretation of this picture. It must have puzzled them at the time to produce a mythological picture. It must have puzzled the religious community, the community as a whole. Some people would say that that's a mythological expression of rebirth, which the Renaissance is about. We've seen it with Masaccio quite clearly, the birth of a new man. We've seen it with Piero della Francesca, the birth of a new man in terms of intellectual awareness. And perhaps this creature in the middle is an expression of the birth of Renaissance man. On the other hand, I'm not quite happy with that interpretation of this particular picture, because it seems to me that she's so ethereal and so delicate that she's almost apologizing for her existence. And it's at this point I'm going to take the liberty of going back to Keats again and to read something from Keats. So let's have the light on. It's a long poem. I'm not going to read it well, but let's read it. It's very interesting to compare it with the Ode to a Grecian Urn. How many know the Ode to a Nightingale? Right, well, hope you're, well, worth listening. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing, but let's read it. Now remember, the Ode to a Grecian Urn ended up with beauty is truth and truth is beauty. The whole sort of concept in the Ode to a Grecian Urn was the classical concept that things that are beautiful are eternal. They are the essential truths. And that all the rest, all the other things, are transient. Worth remembering in terms of day-to-day living, sixth form, when you've had a quarrel with your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your mum, or your dad. If you go and read Ode to a Grecian Urn, you might realise, well, why do we get all upset? It's a transient thing. There are things that are much more important, and we should protect those. We will all have that sort of feeling all our life. But that's what's underlying the Ode to the Grecian Urn. Right? The love is love forever. It's not a transient thing. And that's a sort of feeling you get, or got in Piero della Francesca. That sense of eternity, in that flagellation, if you remember, we were looking at. Right? Although they appear to be frozen, right, the people that are outside that structures appear to be indifferent to the emotional intensity of the flagellation, implying, in fact, that there's something much more substantial than the transient, passing, uncontrollable emotions of man. That's a classical concept. Let's look at a completely different viewpoint by the same poet. I don't know if I'm going to read it all. I don't know, it won't take long. It's terribly covered with all sorts of notes of mine from O-level. My heart aches. Well, that's a good start. That's different to Piero della Francesca, isn't it? They didn't ache. They'd achieved perfection. My heart aches, and a drowsy numbness pains my sense of the hemlock I had drunk. Or emptied some dull opiate to the drains. 1 minute passed, and leaf wards had sunk. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou, like winged dryad of the trees, in some melodious plot of beech and green and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full-throated ease. Oh, for a draught of vintage that have been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting the flora and the country green, dance and provincial song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles brinking at the brim, and purple-stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. Fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou amongst the leaves hast never known, the weariness, the fever and the fret. Here where men sit and hear each other groan, where Pulsey shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre-thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despairs, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his paths, but on the viewless wings of poesy. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry fays. But here there is no light, save what from the heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet, wherewith the seasonable month endows the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid-May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer's eve. Darkling I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many a mused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now more than ever seems it rich to die, to cease upon the midnight with no pain, whilst thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sod. Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird, no hungry generations tread thee down. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth, when sick for home she stood in tears amid the alien corn. The same that oft times hath charmed the magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairylands forlorn. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell to toll me back from thee to my sole self. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Adieu, adieu, thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows or the sill stream, up the hillside, and now 'tis bedded deep in the next valley glades. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music. Do I wake or sleep? I find it utterly amazing that Keats, who was a romantic, not a classic, in our definitions we gave you earlier on, I must say I find it utterly amazing that Keats could write two poems, one which fitted so perfectly with the Piero della Francesca painting, and one which fits so perfectly, not perfectly, but almost perfectly, with this painting. And I think Keats hits on something which Botticelli, it seems to me, and this is quite original what I'm saying to you now, you won't find it in books. I might be completely wrong, I'm not a history scholar, I'm not an art historian. But certainly, when I ultimately clicked with this, I suddenly remembered Keats, and I went back to Keats. And it was Keats that helped me understand possibly what Botticelli is about. But beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, nor new love pine at them beyond tomorrow, I think is the key to that poem, and it's the key, possibly, to the painting. Now, I'm not in the least interested at the moment, Seventh Formers, of giving you interpretations of paintings. All I'm trying to do, clumsy or otherwise, and only you know that, right? All I'm trying to do is get you to appreciate, at the moment, this particular painting. I'm not giving you answers to what the painting is about. I'm not God, and I cannot give you the answers to any painting. No more than I give you the answers to anything that is great, because what is great is infinite, and what is great is eternal. And being infinite and eternal, right, there's going to be different interpretations of it at each generation. We all know in English literature, right, that if you take a play like Hamlet, right, every 10 years there's a different interpretation as what Shakespeare meant when he wrote Hamlet. What was he trying to say? Not every 10 years, every 5 years, people are reassessing, right, reinterpreting what they thought Shakespeare meant. So don't get the idea I'm giving you a precise answer. I'm merely trying to show you my particular relationship with the paintings and how it's helped me to meet the artist halfway. But it seems to me that when one looks at the Botticelli paintings, right, and in particular this one, and one tries to explain to oneself in this sort of history that we're giving you, why Botticelli should, on the one hand, well, we can understand his appreciation of the studied details, which is very much like this poem, because Keats, anybody that studied Keats, will know that he was a lover, if you like, of the luxury of nature. And he talks about white hawthorn and the musk rose and things like that. He was a great lover of natural detail, which we can associate with that. But also, where do the distortions come in? It seems to me, as I gave a hint of it earlier, that here we have this creature being wafted, right, into existence, and she's so ethereal, she's so shy, she's so delicate that she's almost apologizing for her beauty. This is the point. The whole concept was beauty and truth. But here, might there not be, sixth formers, an intuitive questioning of the Platonic concept? This is what I find interesting. Here, Primavera is the name of it. What does it say at the bottom there? Primavera? Again, a middle period of Botticelli. In fact, it might have its stage. It's in the Uffizi now. And again, you could see that how Gothic it's like in a way, because compared with the stage-like structure of Giotto and his prosaicness, and then, this is all revision now, then you've got the extension of the stage to the sort of Percipio looking through the window of Masaccio, with the finding a space in which, a more infinite space from which they can act. And then you get the Piero della Francesca, which is a refinement of those two things. And then you suddenly come to this man, the next important man in line. There are other painters that I don't mention, you must find out for yourself. People like Paleoleo and Costano and so on. I'm only taking the important men, well, the more important men. You come across this, and it is really like a tapestry, isn't it, in its very quality. It has a Uccello quality, only a very slight in its sort of tapestry, its studied detail, its luxuriousness of nature, right? But of course, if one now looks at the drawing of these people, the use of line, you see how far we've gone from Giotto's clumsiness. It's difficult to know what the mythology is. It's really dividing up in the seasons, obviously. Right? I don't think this is winter, and these cold blues blowing it or breathing spring into this creature here. Flowers are growing out of her mouth. Right? Obviously, again, we've got Flora here, the goddess of flowers, I would have thought. We've seen her a detail of that head, right? Beautifully luxurious. And then, in fact, we've got well, these are the three graces. I don't know the mythology, but these are the three graces. Beautiful ethereal creatures. They're almost physically ethereal. The drapery around them is translucent, exposing their rather delicate bodies. And then I suppose autumn here, getting the harvest. There's all sorts of meaning. But the interesting thing in this picture, as we can see it more clearly here, is in fact the creature in the middle, who is very Madonna-like, isn't she? Held together in this sort of a luxury by the lovely rhythm that we saw in Masaccio's tribute money. Right? Lovely feeling of rhythm that runs through that thing in a delicate way. Look at the dance that's going on here. The terrific sense of movement by the precise articulation of his forms with a greater understanding related to the Renaissance of how the human body works. It's a pity. What we ought to do, and that's where I do it badly, we ought to sort of get a contemporary Gothic painting of this period and see that although they were preoccupied in detail, what they didn't have, which the Renaissance had, was the ability to make the whole painting work as a whole. That if you look at these figures here, that whilst there is detail, the whole thing is unified. There's a sort of inner rhythm which sort of follows through the whole thing. The joints all sort of fit together in this articulation. I'll try to show you a slide next week of a painting which doesn't do that and which is Gothic, to show you this, what the Renaissance learning of how the introduction of anatomy now, the introduction of science, of learning to see how the world was made up.